I'm going to get out of the way and let Rachel Ann introduce our last teller of the evening.
So we are delighted. And Milbre has been on a few shows. The latest one was the Snow White show. And for those of you who don't know, I would say just go find Milbre's albums. There's a lot of them. The Jane Yolen albums are some of my favorites. But she is a Grammy nominated spoken word recording artist and recipient of many awards and an inspiration to myself and Cooper. We have always been so thrilled to have you on the show, and we are thrilled to have you bringing us home.
Thank you. Ratcatcher. Once, a war had ravaged the fields and forests surrounding a certain town that sat at the edge of a river. Many of the town's poor had been recruited to fight in the war by profiteers. Most of the conscripts never returned. Those who did were not whole. Selling its citizens as cannon fodder to the highest bidder had amassed a tidy treasury, the town council. The Lord Mayor was a powerful man who could bend the council and the townfolk to his will. Besides the councilman and the Lord Mayor's growing family, most of the community now was women and children. And without a strong man to protect them, they were prey to the town fathers. The poor and the pretty were pressed into service, cleaning privies and warming the beds of the powerful, and some were sold outright to traffickers. And so now, the town was mostly the old, the lame, the indentured, the orphaned. That is to say, it was a place that only rats could flourish in, and the rats did come smelling the corpses in the fields and the forest. Then they made themselves welcome in the town, in the gardens and the attics, the basements and the kitchens, the armoire and the boudoir. Being church-going men, the town council postulated that the devil himself had sent the rodents as a scourge for disbelievers. And since these men were also suspicious of cats, weren't they all witches' familiars? They had passed a law that any cat that could be caught must be drowned. Now, without a cavalry of cats, the town's terriers and mastiffs could not hold back the vermin. With pantries beginning to empty, the dogs fled in search of better stocked larders. And so now the townsfolk must engage the rats without help. And it wasn't long until almost every citizen bore wounds from the fray, but not the orphans. The Lord Mayor had recently assigned his elder daughter to be the new matron of the home for the needy children. Dorchen, as she was called, wished to protect them, and so she secretly fostered a kitten inside the walls of the orphanage. Now, there are some things you should know about Dorchen and her late mother. Dorchen was the 7th child after 6 burly boys. Her mother knew this was a special child, the one she'd prayed for, that she could pass her gifts to. But a gift of healing and using magic must be hidden. Women had been burned for less. But the mother's secret was safe because she was beautiful, and men rarely looked beyond that. However, even at birth, Dorchen was such a plain child that her father knew straight away no man would ever take her off his hands, and so she grew up invisible in his household and beyond the door. When the girl was 5, her baby sister was born with golden curls and rosy cheeks. Alas, the baby was sickly and the mother very weak. And so the Lord Mayor tasked his elder daughter with keeping the younger one alive. He named the baby Pearl. Gretchen is how they said it there, for she was clearly the kind of woman to be that the town would treasure. Now, the mother did recover, but that last hard labor had turned her into a shadow. When the Lord Mayor's eyes turned fully to the town girls working in his home, his wife did not miss him in her bed. As it happened, the longtime matron of the orphanage had quit without notice, and so Dorchen's mother offered to replace her. And the Lord Mayor had no objection. It gave him more time to devote to his other interests. And so the Lord Mayor's wife worked for free there at the orphanage. During all her daylight hours, she left only when her charges were sleeping soundly and returned again at cock's crow. She pledged to protect them, though she could not protect her own 6 strapping sons. For the year after her last child was born, her eldest boy was sent to war. He was 14. That night, little Dorchen at the table asked, "Father, why did Georg leave with those other boys?" The Lord Mayor was silent. So she asked, "And why does the town council wear fur-lined robes when so many of the townfolk are ragged?" The beating she endured that night taught Dorchen to hold her tongue as the rest of her brothers marched away one by one, and her mother faded further with each of their departures. Between her father's blows and her mother's quiet tutelage, Dorchen learned to hide her gifts with silence and cast down eyes. Now, besides the Lord Mayor's remaining daughters, the only other children in town were the orphans, all boys, and each one had arrived damaged in some way. Dorchen's mother treasured these children, but her gifts were not strong enough to heal them. Dorchen's were. And so she tended the children alongside her mother, and baby Gretchen toddled, and then she skipped, and then she ran after her sister, so there were a third pair of hands to help. With these 3 watching over, the orphanage became the closest thing to a happy home in all of the town. Dorchen's gifts could shine inside the orphanage. She wrote pantomimes and she played the hero or the villain equally well. She made costumes and puppets from the dustbin pieces, and she took burnt cork and she corked her eyebrows and drew a curling mustache on her face to play the puppet master, and she used gruff voices and lilting voices to bring the puppets to life. Laughter was one of the ways she healed the children. Now, on his infrequent visits to the orphanage, the Lord Mayor insisted that all the children call him Father. With very solemn faces, they did. For years, Dorchen's mother had kept a journal tallying the loss of all the town's children, the trafficked girls, the conscripted boys, the babies beyond saving. By now, the tallies numbered more than 100, including her 6 sons, all gone and not returned. Each time she made a new mark in the journal, she would then reach in a drawer and take out a flute. And on this, she would pipe a private tune of mourning that made even the cockroaches weep. And then she would take the pipe upstairs and she would play it for the orphan boys, and that way she lifted their spirits in the wake of the loss of a sibling or a friend. Now, at 12, Dorchen was given the pipe to learn to play it, and she practiced every day inside the orphanage until she could make the spiders dance as well as the children. By the time she was 16, Dorchen could pipe the linens into the cupboard and pipe the cutlery onto the table. And that's when her mother gave her the pipe for good. And at last she explained fully its powers and how it might be used. And she pledged Dorchen to protect her little sister and the orphans. That night, the Lord Mayor's wife walked down to the river. She took off her shoes and stepped into the current. In the morning, her shoes were found, but she was not. And so, let's go back to the kitten. Once it was clear that his wife had vacated her position entirely, the Lord Mayor had insisted that Dorchen replace her, and he explained that she'd be trading her labors for lodging at the orphanage so as not to tax the municipal budget. But she kept the cat, and it grew into a wonderful mouser. And she kept it hidden in the office or the kitchen, and at night she and her sister would release it into the dormitories upstairs so that it would keep the vermin away from the children. And so these premises were the only ones that had no fresh rat droppings every morning. Now, the Lord Mayor had wanted her to leave Gretchen behind at home in the mayoral manse, but he knew that with the mother so recently gone, it would be unseemly and that he must wait, for she had blossomed and he had plans for her. Now, one night, the cat, a tabby, had jumped out a window for an assignation with one of the town's last tomcats. A couple of months later, the Lord Mayor, walking past the orphanage towards the church, saw the cat in the dooryard. Her bulging belly and hanging teats betrayed her secret sin. He saw Dorchen open the door and let the cat inside, and so he followed, interrupting the two sisters as they sat with 20 hungry boys trying to finish with breakfast. They asked their father to go. They tried to shoo him from the house, but he took Dorchen by the elbow and led her out in the dooryard. And then he nodded back to her sister and he said, "Has Gretchen begun to bleed yet?" She shook her head. "Good," he said. "There are those who desire just such a girl." And then he looked at the cat lying on the hearth in the kitchen and he said, "Promise that you will tell me as soon as the cat has delivered." And Dorchen nodded this time. She saw her father's nibbled cuffs, his bandaged fingers, and she thought this suggested that he had changed his past policies about ratcatchers. And so, in a week's time, she saw him passing by on the way to church again, and she brought him in to admire the cat and her striped kittens. He bent down as though to stroke them, and Dorchen said, "As soon as they are weaned, we can offer them to the other townspeople. They will be good mousers too. They will keep the rats away inside and out." He watched as she and her sister lined up their charges to go to chapel, and he barked, "Good morning, children." "Good morning, Father," they said. Go on to church now, for the devil is always watching and wanting to take bad children to hell. As they filed out the door, he looked at this piteous company. Surely none of these boys would live to adulthood, and he began to calculate in his mind how the town council might save money by closing the orphanage. What he did not know was that one of Dorchen's gifts was to make you see what you expected to see. The truth is, she had healed all of the boys' ailments. And to an unweirded eye, they looked like healthy cannon fodder. But he could not see that. As soon as the troop of brats had gone, the Lord Mayor went back into the kitchen. He picked up a flour sack and he put the cat and each of the kittens inside, and he tied it tight, and then he marched to the city well. He dropped the sack into the bucket and he lowered the bucket into the well until the splashing stopped. And when the two girls came back with their wards, they found the sodden sack with its still contents just outside the kitchen door. No one ever called the Lord Mayor father again. And the rats, they nibbled the food, they nibbled the fabrics, they nibbled the sleeping residents in nearly every household, until one morning the Lord Mayor, with a bandage on his nose this time and holes in his ermine-lined robe, went to the town hall, gathered the city council, and began to talk about how they must banish all the little devils. That's what he said, and by that he meant the rats and the orphans. And before that day was out, there was a crier striding from the town end to end, calling out that they were searching for a Ratcatcher to rid them of the vermin, and the money would be a tidy sum. And if that same exterminator were willing to resettle the orphans in another village, the money would be more. When Dorchen heard these words being shouted in the byways, she went straight away to her father's office. She found him sweeping rat droppings off his desk with a whisk broom. "Do you intend to close the orphanage?" "Yes," he said, "and I am sending you with them. You are as good as your mother in taking care of the children. Surely another municipality would be ready and pleased to pay you for your services, but you must leave your little sister Gretchen here. I have other plans for her." "Indeed," said Dorchen, and she turned to go, for she had work to do. When she got back to the home, she told her sister her plan. She asked the girl to pack their things for them and to oversee the boys in gathering their few possessions and their bedrolls in the morning to make ready for a journey. And then Dorchen went to the dustbins and took out odds and ends of fabric, and from that motley jumble of cloth she made herself a suit of scraps, trousers and a shirt, and boot covers that laced up to the knee, and a matching hat. And in the morning, just after breakfast, she took out her mother's journal, and she tallied the rest of the town's children and closed it. Then she dressed in her motley suit, and she took that burnt cork and she darkened her chin convincingly. She picked up the flute and slipped out the door. Anyone who saw her mistook her for a youth with stubble and a too dirty face from living too long out of doors. And she began to play a mournful tune and walked to the town hall. Now the Lord Mayor and the councilmen all looked out the window to see the strange vagabond who was coming into the square, but all the other town folk took to their beds when they heard the lament, for the sound reminded them of their lost loved ones. The councilmen all filed onto the steps of the city hall, gape-mouthed, looking at this Pied Piper. The stranger stepped forward and spoke in a low voice. Is it true that you wish to rid your town of all its vermin? The Lord Mayor nodded, but he was distracted by a group of rats that were lolling about the town well like teenage boys. And is it true that you also wish to get rid of the orphans? The Lord Mayor nodded again. Show me what you intend to pay. He told one of his minions to go inside. The man came back with a strong box full of golden guilders. The Lord Mayor snatched it from the man and shook it so that the coins rattled inside. And the piper said, I agree to rid your town of the vermin. And lifting up the pipe, began to play a martial tune. And the councilman watched amazed as an ocean of rats came pouring out of the buildings and the yards. They were dancing on their hind legs, tumbling over one another to get closer to the motley youth, who turned with the furry flood tide behind and began to dance to the river's edge. The town council and the Lord Mayor could not stop themselves from going too. Holding the strongbox tight, the Lord Mayor led the rest of them into a line and watched astonished as gray wave after gray wave after gray wave washed into the river till all the rats were gone. When the piper paused, the Lord Mayor finally found his voice and he said, You unholy Ratcatcher! We cannot pay you for witches' work. We are good Christian men. We do not make bargains with the devil. We will hang you as a sorcerer. And the piper said, Then how will you be rid of your orphans? The Lord Mayor chuckled. Do you mean to drown them too? That wasn't our original plan, but if you can do it, we might spare your life. And he turned to the others and he winked and he whispered, We can hang him for murder as well as sorcery. The piper stood quietly, and before the flute was lifted again, other of the town councilmen begged to speak. One said, If you drown the orphans, you must drown the matron. She won't let you otherwise. No, but not her pretty little sister, said another man. He turned to the Lord Mayor and said, You promised us. And the men in the council all chorused, Yes, you promised all of us. Their meaning was clear. The piper said, I agree to rid you of all the vermin, and began to pipe a new tune. And the Lord Mayor and the town councilmen all began to dance and frolic and cavort in childish jig. He was holding on to the strong box tightly, but he led the line, the Lord Mayor did, as they went dancing, wild-eyed, into the water, laughing, weeping, gurgling, until they were all gone. The piper paused, and then she piped the strongbox up from the depths to land at her feet. And she carried it back to the orphanage. There she played a note or two of a polka. Hearing her sister signal, Gretchen came out with all of the boys with packs and bedrolls and a bag of food each. Her little sister brought the 2 packs that the women would carry. And the piper piped the golden guilders out of the strongbox into her bedroll. And then the Pied Piper and the Lord Mayor's younger daughter led the boys dancing into the hills and away. They never returned. Now the town folk, those who might have peeked out the windows and seen these wondrous sights, must have been so bedazzled they could not remember what had happened. Or perhaps They were too embarrassed to speak of town fathers who sold their neighbors and their children for profit. And so, the remaining townfolk made up their own story of what had happened in Hamelin town that day. But you and I know the truth.
My goodness. Yes. Thank you so much, Milbre. That was an incredible way to wrap this up. Now, we'll have you spotlight here in just a moment. What's coming up? What are you up to now?
Well, I think I mentioned 3 things to Cooper on February 1st. I am teaching a class, a virtual class for the Story Center at the Mid-Continent Public Library. And it is for a certificate program, but anyone can register for it. It's on Introduction to Storytelling Varieties, which basically is the charms and challenges of genre workshop that I teach. On the 5th, I am delighted to be emceeing a concert, Kind Stories in Concert, for the Healing Story Alliance with some wonderful community tellers and nationally known tellers. A great night. And last but certainly not least, I'm doing a concert called Ancient Love Stories with Charlotte Blake Alston and Heather Forrest and Megan Wells and Laura Sims on February 13th, Valentine's Eve. So that will be a virtual concert as well. Hope you all will look at those links and consider joining in the fun in any of those settings.